Hi everybody. Just wanted to talk about chapter 1 here. And this first chapter is about how to collect data, and then further on later in the book we'll talk about how to analyze the data. But so section 1.1 is about introduction to the practices of statistics. So some of the things we'll cover in this section is define statistics and statistical thinking. And then we'll explain the process of statistics, distinguish between qualitative and quantitative variables, distinguish between discrete and continuous variables, and determine the level of measurement of a variable. So the first objective, we want to define what statistics and statistical thinking is. And I don't think this is anything I'm going to ask you on an exam to memorize, but statistics is the science of collecting, organizing, summarizing, and analyzing information to draw conclusions or answer questions. In addition, statistics is about providing a measure of confidence in any conclusions. The information referred to in the definition is called data, and data are a fact or proposition used to draw a conclusion or make a decision. Data describe characteristics of an individual. A key aspect of data is that they vary. Is everyone in your class the same height? Does everyone have the same hair color? No. So among individuals, there is variability. In fact, data vary when measured on ourselves as well. Do you sleep the same number of hours every night? No. Do you consume the same number of calories every day? No, you don't. One goal of statistics is to describe and understand sources of variability. Objective 2, explain the process of statistics. The entire group of individuals to be studied is called the population. An individual is a person or object that is a member of the population being studied. A sample is a subset of the population that is being studied. Descriptive statistics consist of organizing and summarizing data. Descriptive statistics describe data through their numerical summaries, tables, and graphs. A statistic is a numerical summary based on a sample. So the idea basically is that a statistic is something that you get from doing some sort of sample. So you maybe take a sample of everybody in the class and ask them what their height is, and then you find the average. That would be a statistic. Inferential statistics uses methods that take results from a sample, extend them to the population, and measure the reliability of the results. We'll kind of start to talk about that when we get into later chapters, like chapter 9 and 10. A parameter is a numerical summary of the entire population. So whereas a statistic will refer to a sample, a parameter refers to the entire population, not just a sample or part of the population. So let's do some examples of parameters versus statistics. So suppose that the percentage of all students on your campus who have a job is 84.9%. This value represents a parameter because it's a numerical summary of the entire population. Suppose that a sample of 250 students is obtained, and from that sample we find that 86.4% have a job. This value represents a statistic because it is a numerical summary based on a sample from the entire population. So let's talk about the process of statistics. So the first step is to identify the research objective. And so if you're a researcher, you must determine the questions that you want answered. The questions must be detailed so that it identifies the population that is studied and the questions that are to be answered. You want to collect the data needed to answer the questions. Gaining access to an entire population is often difficult and expensive. When conducting research, you typically want to look at a sample. The collection of data is vital to the statistical process. If the data is collected incorrectly, conclusions drawn may not be useful. And so don't overlook the importance of appropriate data collection processes, which we'll talk about in the next couple sections. And then as far as describing the data, obtaining descriptive statistics allows the researcher to obtain an overview of the data and can provide insight as to the type of statistical methods that the researchers use, and we'll discuss this step in detail in chapters 2 through 4. And then step 4 is about performing the inference. So in this case, you're basically applying techniques to try to extend what you've learned from the sample to the entire population with a certain reliability, and we'll talk about that in the later chapters, like I said, 9 through 15. So let's look at an example of illustrating the process of statistics. So many studies evaluate batterer treatment programs, but there are a few experiments designed to compare batterer treatment programs to non-therapeutic treatments such as community service. So we're talking about people that batter their spouses or beat their spouses. And so researchers designed an experiment in which 376 male criminal court defendants who were accused of assaulting their intimate female partners were randomly assigned into either a treatment group or a control group. The subjects in the treatment group entered a 40-hour batterer treatment program, while the subjects in the control group received 40 hours of community service. After 6 months, it was reported that 21% of males in the control group had further battering incidents, while 10% of the males in the treatment group had further battering incidents. The researchers concluded that the treatment was effective in reducing repeat battering offenses. You can see the source here, not that it matters, but so this is an actual study. And step 1 is to identify the research objective. So the research objective is to determine whether males accused of battering their intimate female partners that were assigned into a 40-hour batterer treatment program are less likely to batter again compared to those assigned to 40 hours of community service. Step 2 would be to collect the information needed to answer the question. So the research group randomly divides the subjects into 2 groups. Group 1 participants receive the 40-hour batterer program, while Group 2 participants receive 40 hours of community service. 6 months after the program ended, the percentage of males that battered their intimate female partners was determined. Step 3 is to describe the data, organize, or in other words, to organize and summarize the information. The demographic characteristic of the subjects in the experimental and control group were similar. After 6 months treatment, 21% of the males in the control group had any further battering incidents, while 10% of the males in the treatment group had any further battering incidents. We extend the results of the 376 males in the study to all males who batter their intimate female partner, that is, males who batter their intimate female partner and participate in a batterer treatment program are less likely to batter again. So that would be step 4, drawing conclusions from the data. So that was an example of how to conduct a statistical experiment. So objective 3, we want to distinguish between qualitative and quantitative variables. So variables are characteristics of an individual within a population, and that could refer to many different things. It could refer to height, age, weight, IQ scores, anything. The key point is that variables change, right? So consider, for example, height. If all individuals had the same height, then obtaining the height of an individual would be sufficient knowledge to determine the height of every individual. Of course, this isn't the case, and so as researchers, we wish to identify the factors that will influence variability in certain variables. Qualitative or categorical variables allow for classification of individuals based on some attribute or characteristic. So an example of qualitative variable could be like color, something where there's no quantitative distinction, or could have to do with various other qualitative things. So things where you can't necessarily rank things in order, whereas quantitative variables provide numerical measures of individuals. Arithmetic operations such as addition and subtraction can be performed on the values of the quantitative variable and provide meaningful results. So an example of quantitative variable might be height. So for example, you can compare the height of one person to another and say that one person is taller than another, or shorter, whereas say for example colors, you can't do that. Like, so if you're measuring like the color of everybody's shirt in a given population, whether there's more green or red doesn't really tell you, it doesn't really help you compare the colors necessarily. So an example would be here to distinguish between qualitative and quantitative variables. So a researcher, in this case, studies factors that affect eating habits of adults in their mid-30s, and the international we want to classify each of the following variables considered in the study as qualitative or quantitative. So nationality. So that would be a qualitative variable, right? Because you can't say that one nationality is greater or smaller than another. The number of children would be quantitative. Household income would be quantitative. Level of education, again, that would be more qualitative. And then daily intake of whole grains, that would be quantitative. Objective 4 is to distinguish between discrete and continuous variables. So we've talked about various variables and whether they're qualitative or quantitative. You can also talk about whether variables are discrete, whether the information sort of comes in chunks, or whether it's continuous, meaning you can get one from one value to the other by going through all the other values in between. So discrete variable is a quantitative variable that has either a finite number of possible values or a countable number of possible values. The term countable means that the values result from being able to count 0, 1, 2, 3, and so on. Qualitative variables basically can't be discrete or continuous because they're not quantitative, so only quantitative variables can be discrete or continuous. A continuous variable is a quantitative variable that has an infinite number of possible values it can take on and can be measured to any desired level of accuracy. So an example in this case would be, we want to distinguish between discrete and continuous variables. So going back to the study we were talking about before, the number of children would be discrete, right? You can't have 1.5 children or 1 3/4 children. I mean, you can, I guess, but the half a child wouldn't be alive, presumably. Household income, that would be continuous because you can essentially, I guess it might be discrete in the sense that it can vary by a penny, but it's essentially continuous. You could have one person makes $100,000 and another person makes $100,000 in a penny, so it's essentially continuous. And then the daily intake of whole grains, unless you're measuring each individual grain, that would be continuous. The list of observations a variable assumes is called data. And while gender is a variable, the observations male or female are data. Qualitative data are observations corresponding to a qualitative variable. Quantitative data are observations corresponding to a quantitative variable. Discrete data are observations corresponding to a discrete variable. Continuous data are observations corresponding to a continuous variable. Objective 5 is to determine the level of measurement of a variable. A variable is at the nominal level of measurement if the values of the variable name, label, or categorize. In addition, the naming scheme does not allow for the values of the variable to be arranged or ranked in a specific order. And I'm just so that you guys know, I'm probably not going to test you on this, but just to go through it here. A variable is at the ordinal level of measurement if it has properties of a nominal level of measurement and naming schemes allowing for their variable to be ranked in a specific order. So, for example, ranks in the military might be an example. A variable has interval level of measurement if it makes sense basically to add and subtract measurement in this case. And then a variable has a ratio level of measurement if it has the properties of the previous level of measurement, and then it can also be multiplication and division also make sense. So here's an example. So we want to determine the level of measurement of the various variables here. So a study was conducted to assess school eating patterns in high schools in the United States and school lunch and snack patterns among high school students associated with food, environment, and policies, and we want to determine the level of measurement of the following variables considered in the study. So the number of snacks and soft drink vending machines in the school, that would be ratio, right? Because you could sort of say that you could say, for example, divide that into another number and see whether there are twice as many soft drinks or vending machines compared to another school. Whether or not the school has a closed campus policy during lunch, so that would it's either open or closed. Class rank, like freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, right? Seniors are considered to be higher up on the totem pole than freshmen, so that would be an ordinal level of measurement. And the number of days per week a student eats lunch at school, that would be ratio. Okay, well that wraps up that section. So the next section we'll look at is section 1.2 on observational studies versus designed experiments. Right, if you guys have any questions or anything, don't be afraid to contact me if you need help, and don't forget you can use the Ask Your Instructor button to come and see me if you need help. And